do. Next week we'll do this without live stream. We'll do the group a little bit different, where we'll do like more of a. I will be here, but we'll set the room up the same way. But I might not lecture as much next week. We might just do more of an open share kind of thing. So if you haven't been to one of those groups, come next week and check that thing out. See if I can get this going. This is always the most interesting part of the process. And then we can move this so you guys can see. So you guys can see. All right, so I have some topics that I was going to discuss tonight around a couple different things, but as always, I'm open to feedback or ideas or any questions that the group may have. Does anybody have any burning desire or anything that they feel like they want to get answered, that they came here to get answered? I can write it down, or I can make sure that we cover it as we go through. Anybody got anything that they need to make sure we talk about? And what happens a lot of times is as we go through, people will kind of think of things, or I'll trigger things, and that's fine too. We can camp out and talk about that. So let's see here. What's going on here? Let's try this again. Good morning, guys. We got a seat over here. We got a couple over here. Here's a couple chairs. There you go. Let's see if we can get this thing going. Yes.
While you're getting going, I just like to share some hope for y'all. I went and saw my daughter. She's almost 90 days clean, and it really was like I had my daughter back.
Fantastic.
The kicker was when she wanted me to introduce me to her friends. And when she's 19, I don't remember when that happened.
Yeah, that's not a common thing. I don't know why this won't come up, guys. Let me see if this is. That's the way computers do. They just don't cooperate, do they? No, it's the right thing. Try this one more time, and then we might have to wing it. This isn't going to work. Duplicate these displays. Where the heck? Very unusual. This is not on. Sorry about this, guys. Technical difficulty. One more time. Well, I don't know what the problem here is. We're going to have to wing it. You guys have to deal. Go old school. No PowerPoint. Very weird. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so my name's Rich Jones. I'm the CEO here at Favor Greenville. It's going to be very strange for me to do this without a PowerPoint. I don't know if I've ever done this before. People have been coming for a while. I think I usually have this going. I have an agenda that I was going to go through tonight. I was going to talk a little bit about what is addiction, what's the difference between like kind of heavy use and something other than heavy use where it takes on a life of its own. And then I was going to talk through kind of what are family options. We've gone through that before in here. Remember, we know, so I know what it's like to be on the other side of it. I know what it's like to be the person who's in addiction who needs recovery. I also know what it's like to be a father dealing with this with a daughter. And then I know kind of like what it's like to do this for 19 years professionally from all kinds of different angles, including inpatient rehab, this place of favor, interventionist. And so I know a lot of times people come with very specific ideas on what can we do? What can I do about this situation? And so we try to boil that down the best we can and give you that information as we go through. A lot of times, I wish we had more answers. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I wish there was another thing that we could say, try this or do that or say this or say that. And I swear as true as I'm standing here, if there was, we would tell you that. Many times you kind of have come up against this process and you sort of know what the next step is or you know what your options are. It's just really, really hard to do. It's not so much what do I do, it's how do I do it. And that's been my experience a lot going through this. And what we'll find is a lot of times people will ask the questions around it. We'll walk them through this, and there tends to be 3 or 4 different scenarios that you can kind of choose from. And I'm going to walk through those and talk about those and see if anybody has any questions so that you leave here having a little bit of a clear idea of what might be up. Yes?
Can you turn these guys off?
Well, I'm hoping that they come on. Yeah, I'm hoping for a miracle that something like all of a sudden happens, you know. I don't think it's going to, now that you said that. You jinxed it. It was going to work fine there for a minute, but now it's like, it's not going to. I'm plugging this and plugging it back in. Let's try that.
Make sure your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is on.
Very weird. It's like it isn't going through the, I don't know. I'm going to fire somebody. I'm going to fire somebody tomorrow. Let them know that. Who's here? It's the staff. Spread the word. I'm firing somebody tomorrow. I can't take this.
If you're here tonight,
Here tomorrow. Don't come tomorrow. Oh, man.
I just can't believe there's no IT person here.
You don't think?
No one does this for a living?
No, there's no one here. We don't have a chief technology
I know, just
officer.
enough about computers to be dangerous. No.
All right. Well, so a little bit about me real quick. I'm a person in long-term recovery. So my story is it was alcohol way before it was pills, but it wound up being pills that kind of brought me to my knees. I probably would have continued to drink. Drinking is, socially acceptable. It's part of the culture. It's part of the deal. I was in the business world. It was kind of what we did. I was in a car accident, and I wound up getting prescribed. I walked out of the emergency room with 120 Darvocet. And this was in Western Pennsylvania, kind of ground zero for the opioid epidemic. And, one thing leads to another. At that period of time, it wasn't a period of time when you really could buy these on the street. It was just sort of the beginning of this whole process. So every pill I got from a doctor. I don't blame the doctors for that. I do not blame them. I went in there with an agenda every single time. Now, I do think it's a little weird that no one said anything at any point in time. I mean, how many times can these things get stolen out of your car, right? And, how bad can that neck pain get? And, but this was at the beginning of that whole fiasco, guys, when everybody was being told, don't let anyone feel pain, don't let anyone feel pain. And it really, really spun me out, took me to some really, really dark places. If you're dealing with this with your loved one, you know what I'm talking about. Really behaving in ways it's not me. Doing things that's not me. I didn't know what was going on at the time. I didn't know what that was all about. I'd never really understood or heard the word addiction. I knew that there were these things called rehabs, and I knew that there were places you could go where you could go see a therapist and stuff like that, but you were never going to get me to go there, and I was never going to utter those words, and I was never going to talk about this. And but here's what's interesting. I wasn't in denial. If my family would have been sitting where you were, they might have said, what do we do? Rich is in denial. I wasn't in denial. I knew something was wrong. I absolutely knew something was wrong. What I was rejecting the idea that you were going to label me as anything. But I certainly wasn't in denial. Believe me, you could, a lot of times, even for you guys that are dealing with this, it's hard to be in denial. It's hard. If you guys are sitting here, it's probably progressed to a point where they know something's up. And the more accurate question isn't, do they think there's not a problem? The more accurate question is, do they want to do something about the problem? Because remember, knowing that you have a problem does not mean that you want to change the problem. It just means that you're willing to be like, okay, I get it. I've gone to jail. I've lost my job. I got kicked out of rehab, whatever it is. I get it that I have a problem, but that doesn't mean that I would want to change it, which is really, really hard for people to understand. Because you would think what? That if this happened, if fill in the blank, if the person got in a car accident and nearly died from drinking and driving, if the person overdosed and was met at the hospital and made it through, you would think that what? That leads to change. But that's the baffling part of this process. That the logic involved, like 1 + 2 = 3, that goes away when you start talking about substance use disorder, and you move into this thing called addiction. So after I got into recovery, I went back to school and I became a therapist, and for most of my career I worked in pretty traditional places. I've started a couple rehabs, I've run a couple mental health facilities, and then also a private practice, interventions, and I've been here at Favor Greenville for, this is the 6th year. Favor Greenville is a little bit different. We don't do counseling services, we do coaching services. Our services are free, and they're meant to kind of address the unmet need of engaging the person and trying to work with the person who doesn't want help. It's very counterintuitive for people to hear that. You know, how can you help somebody who doesn't want help? Well, technically what we believe is they do want help, they just haven't expressed that. And it doesn't always play out that way, of course. Of course we get told, you know, leave me alone. But many times what looks like I don't want help is actually I'm scared, I'm frightened, or probably more accurately, I might want help, I'm not sure. You guys get that part? That's probably the most accurate part of this process. It isn't like, leave me alone, Rich, get out of my face. It's kind of like, all right, maybe. Or, I want to change, but I don't want to change everything. You guys get that? You understand that one? That's like, I've been doing this drug, and it's destroying my life, and I'm going to put that on the shelf, but I don't want to give up everything. That's really, really natural, guys. That's a really, really natural part of this process. It's very, very hard for people to understand. And I understand that it's very hard for family members to deal with that, because you're watching a person self-destruct right in front of you. I got recovery through pretty traditional means. I wound up going to a program, and I wound up doing 12-step meetings, and I've been in recovery for about 19 years. So that's what brings me here. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right. So let's talk right off the jump on these 5 or 6 different ideas, different options that family members might be faced with. And again, everything I talk about tonight, I'm painting with a really broad brush. You have to apply it to your individual situation, everybody's individual situation. And what do I mean by that? How long have you been dealing with this? How old is your loved one? What are the particular drugs involved? Where are they living? Who else is? There's a long list of things that are going to play into what you can do and what you can't do. And we have folks that come in across the spectrum dealing with this issue. Sometimes they know it's been going on for 10 years. It's been going on for 20 years. Sometimes they're sitting in those seats and they just now found out for the first time that something's going down. Sometimes we're dealing with a 19-year-old. Sometimes we're dealing with a 59-year-old. Those are 2 different dynamics. So, all right, so the first thing is you do have the option of just doing what you've been doing to this point, and you don't have to do anything different. You can continue to come to groups like this and continue to read about this issue and learn about it and start to try to figure out and monitor the situation. You might not know exactly how bad it is, so maybe that's a reason to monitor it. You might not know exactly what you're dealing with. You might be afraid to do anything. What do I mean by that? When I say the family might be afraid to do anything, what am I speaking to? Anybody? Can anyone relate to what I'm talking about? Yes?
I think if we did something, that was like we had to leave ours in life too.
So it's a change for the family, definitely. So there's a process that like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. The other thing with fear is, and we kind of know this when we're out there actively using, that we sort of have you over a barrel. And it's what? That if I do something, if I start setting some boundaries and I start saying some things and I start maybe saying you're not going to be able to continue to live here, or I'm not going to continue to pay the rent, that that the person is going to get worse. And then we're going to go off, and we're going to go off the deep end, and you're not going to know where we are, and we're not going to talk to you anymore. And we hold you hostage with that fear of that possibility. And that's another reason why people sometimes just aren't ready to make a move. And we're okay with that. Just understand, though, we don't have another answer for that. Really, the answer for that is continue to come to this group, continue to process that and think about it. But that is an option. You don't have to do anything. You can sit on this for a minute. You can start, the second option is you can start to change small boundaries. You don't have to make a huge move right off the jump. You can start to what? You can start to change your response to situations. You can maybe, instead of like saying you got to leave the house, maybe you start withholding money, or maybe, I don't know, you find out other ways to influence the person. The downside to this is that nothing's going to happen fast with small boundaries. The upside is it's less likely to be drama-filled. It's less likely to turn into, you guys know what I mean, it turns into a screaming match, a battle, a storm off, a punch the drywall move. Dudes like to punch drywall. Boys like to punch drywall, right? Do girls punch holes in drywall as well? Maybe what you should do is just get cement walls and paint it like this. It'd be a natural consequence to punching the drywall.
Oh man, I'll fix the wall.
Okay, all right. It's just, and again, remember, these are very emotional situations that as a parent you will naturally avoid, or as a spouse you will naturally avoid. You're not, I mean, there are some people who are very, very confrontational. There are some people who are wired that way. But most people are wired to get along with the people that they're closest to. They're literally hardwired that way. So for you to kind of go ahead and start pushing on this a little bit it'll be counterintuitive. But you may have already done this, and you might be like, I've been there, done that, Rich. Or maybe you're like, I'm tired of this, I'm going to start making some changes. And so that's the second option. The third option is we call these family meetings. We don't call them interventions. The reason we don't call them an intervention is they don't involve a bottom line. A bottom line is an ultimatum. An ultimatum. Hey, Rich, if you don't go to rehab, here's the deal. You're no longer living here. You got to get out of the house. Hey, Rich, if you don't come see this counselor, we're not paying for school anymore. Do you guys get that? There's literally like an ultimatum with if you don't do this, here's what's going to happen at the end of it. That's an intervention. A family meeting with that is an intervention. You can do it without that, guys, and you can literally get whoever you can get involved, have them come in, sit down, talk to the person, and simply say, we can't watch this anymore. This is killing us. I can't sleep at night. I can't eat. I'm nervous. I'm anxious all the time. We're going to shut this thing down. Can you please do something about this? Believe it or not, about 60% of the time that works. 60 to 65% of the time. It especially works in situations where the person doesn't actually know that everyone knows. Do you guys know what I mean by that? Usually with younger people. So, for example, they know that mom and dad know, but they don't know that grandma knows. So you're going to get them in and you're going to let them know grandma knows. Or grandma's going to know. Do you follow what I'm saying? You're blowing it all up and you're getting the elephant out. You're talking about the elephant in the room. So that's a third option. A fourth option is just a good old-fashioned intervention. I don't know how many people have done an intervention or been part of an intervention. An intervention is a family meeting where everybody expresses their point of view, but at the end, there's literally what are called bottom lines. And the bottom lines are, if you don't do what we ask you to do today, here's what we're going to do from this point forward. The fifth and final option is to just detach from the situation. Stop taking phone calls. Stop rescuing. You don't have to say anything. You just have to work on yourself and try to pull yourself away from the situation. The idea there would be what? It saves you. It literally saves your life probably, because you're probably getting worn out by the situation. And if you change and you step back, that increases the likelihood that the person is going to change. Detachment usually happens. It happens more often when it's spouses. Look what I'm doing with spouses. I don't even know why I did that. It happens more often with spouses or with parents where the kids are much older and you've been dealing with it a long time, because you just get tired of it. You get worn out and you're like, I'm done. I'm not taking your calls anymore. I'm not coming to get you out of jail. I'm not going to pay for you to get another apartment because you know what? We've done this 50 times, which might be different than what? The 19-year-old where you're like, okay, we're going to give this a shot. You guys get that? It's so important to do individualized approaches in these situations. Do you guys have any questions about that? Do you have any questions about it? And it's not about a right or wrong answer. It's not about figuring it out tonight on exactly what you want to do. Carol?
Yeah, my circumstance with my daughter, who ended up becoming a heroin addict and almost dying a couple times, because I didn't have the information that I'm getting at Favor, which is the very things you're talking about, moving along, progressing, to doing everything I can for him to kick it around. And this occurred over several years. And when I finally one day had spent a week, night and day in the ICU with her, and then I was exhausted trying to work a job and everything. And then I finally went home. She was in Atlanta. I finally went home, and she had moved to a room and had left the hospital with that, and just totally left the hospital. Went to a friend's house. Her friend said she could spend the night. The next day she called me and said, Meredith took all the medicine her doctor gave her last night. She can't stay anymore. Can you come get her? So I went from doing nothing to saying no.
Yeah.
I cannot come get her not because I didn't want to help her. I was totally friggin' exhausted. There was not one inch of energy left in me.
Yes.
That's why these steps are so important.
Well, and that's also why you have to talk about that, because the truth is that one of the things, and you guys have heard the term codependency, right? And so codependency is it's a term that it gets thrown around a lot and talked about a lot, and I believe to a certain degree it's misunderstood in terms of the dynamics. But what I can tell you, in a classic way, codependency is when you ignore your own feelings and you ignore your own welfare. And so you're getting worn out, and you're getting worn out, and you're getting worn out, and you can't do anything, and you can't do anything, and you can't sleep at night, and you can't work, and you're going to lose your job. You know, you got to take a look at this and say, like, I have to do something. I'm done with this. I'm not coming to get you. Yes, sir.
So it seems like I've been through those 5 steps more than once.
Yes. Yes. So it's a great question. So his comment is, what if I've done all of those? If you've gone through all of these, the one that you land on whenever you are like done is detachment. Because detachment is can be a permanent situation, because it doesn't involve action other than saying no. You get that?
Yes.
You don't have to put together a team. You don't have to have an intervention. Detachment is kind of like where you land when you feel like you've done everything else, or you've done it over and over and over again, and you're kind of like, I'm done with this now. So let's talk about detachment for a minute. Detachment comes out of the Al-Anon tradition, and it's the classic stuff that was developed mostly for, again, spouses, wives dealing with husbands. And the idea was, and it was developed in the 50s, and it was in a culture where you really couldn't divorce. You didn't really divorce then. You kind of stayed. And so the deal was, how do I stay here and deal with this? Well, I developed this ability to emotionally detach and financially detach and physically detach from the situation and from the person. So I don't react the same way as I used to. When the call comes in, I don't jump. I'm exhausted. You'll hear people say that all the time. If there's one common thing around detachment, it's that I'm just so worn out, I can't do this anymore. And you have to honor that, but you also have to practice detachment. If you are trying to detach, it's going to take some skills and some effort. In what kind of ways? What do I mean by that? What kind of things are you going to have to learn to do if you're going to detach? What kind of stuff do you have to learn how to do?
No.
Well, it starts with saying no. What else?
Telephone calls, don't take them.
Don't take the calls. What else? So you need to know how to not respond to all this stuff. But more important than anything, you're going to have to get comfortable with anxiety and worry, at least for a little bit. Because the reason why people why they take the phone calls and why they say yes when they want to say no is because that's better than worrying all night. And you're literally like, okay, I'll take the call because I'm not going to sit here and do this all night. So if you're going to detach, you have to practice the skill. I use the word skill of sitting in bad feelings, of literally being able to get through the night anxiety ridden, or get through the night sleepless a couple times. Now here's what you find out is, like anything else, once you do it a couple times, you tend to get better. You tend to do better with it. Anything we do, we're better whenever we go through it. You know, and why would people do that? Well, they would literally be like, it is better than what I was living with. Especially if I've been living with this for 40 years or 30 years. Do you follow what I'm saying? Like, this sucks and this sucks, but this sucks worse, living with this. Do you guys get that? It's not a great decision. It's not a great situation. Nobody does cartwheels when they decide to detach. And there's no easy way to do it. There's no way that anyone can say, like, here it is, here's the secret formula, boom, you're good to go, detach from the situation. But it is absolutely an option, and here's the thing. So when you do that, we recommend things like support groups. We recommend support groups like this, but we recommend like Al-Anon as well. Therapy, talking to people can help. If you're trying to detach, just literally like talking through your anxiety. Does anyone else have any advice for the group if they feel like that anybody here is a detachment ninja and would like to share the secrets? You know, anybody got that?
We in our situation, we detached financially.
Yeah.
And then he detached emotionally.
Okay.
We didn't have to choose to go through the emotional detachment. Like we still reached out to him, but he detached us.
Okay. So you set a boundary. You set a boundary. So you worked out kind of like on column 2, where we have a boundary. We're not going to pay for anything. We're not going to do that. And the person responded. And I get that. That will happen too. Sometimes people will just vote with their feet, and you won't hear from them for a while. That also involves a lot of worry and a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. Yes?
I think once you detach, you have to make a new life for yourself and start doing other things.
So you can't sit in it. You cannot just sit there and day after day, what if? You got to get active. You got to try to find new interests. You got to find, because remember, this has probably been consuming a lot of your time. You've probably been thinking about this a lot. Addiction tends to take up a lot of space in people's lives. Yes?
So my son's 28, and I've been dealing with it for 10 years. And what seems to happen is I'll detach, and I'm pretty good about detaching. Most of the rest of my life is great. And then it's like you kind of get a second wind.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, let's try something again.
Yeah.
And so now I've been through like 2 or 3 of those cycles, just kind of dealing with one right now where we kind of re-entered and tried to do some things and it didn't work, and now I'm moving back towards detaching.
So it's interesting. If you look at like detachment in the classic sense, it really is like I'm emotionally detaching from this person, and I will have minimal interactions with them, even though we're living in the same house together. We'll grunt at each other occasionally, and you do whatever you're going to do. You're going to get drunk, you do your thing, but I'm not. That's it. It's true emotional detachment, and a lot of times that's hard to deal with, and people will wind up getting kind of like sucked back in, but what you want to watch out for is you don't want the pendulum to swing the other way, and you become too overly involved again. So one of the ideas would be, you can detach, but you can detach differently maybe than a classic way, where you'd be like, hey, but you'd have to really be disciplined to do this. You'd have to really be disciplined. You'd have to know yourself very well. But I have known people that would be like, I had a client in Pittsburgh that I've worked with for about six years. Since I moved to South Carolina, I've worked with this family. And I worked with them when I was in Pittsburgh. Actually, I've worked with this kid for like 10 years, believe it or not. And so what we worked on was the dad would meet with them and have lunch and stuff, and they would talk about football and the weather. That was literally what we'd say, talk about football and the weather. That was it, nothing else. I'm not paying for college. I don't want to hear about it. That kind of thing. The kid never did do this, but I imagine if he showed up on the door of a rehab and he was begging to go in, the dad would have put him in. But there was like this, it was still this arm's length, but they still had contact. The problem with that is if you have that contact, what can happen? Sometimes you can get sucked back in to some of the stuff that got you in this jam. Carolyn?
The thing that we did, when we detached and we had to evict her, was I told her that I would always take her to a meeting. So if she would call me at 11:45, that meant she wanted to come here. So I would take that.
Yeah,
call.
and so can I use this as an example though? This is when I'm talking about individual situations. She's what, 19? So the question becomes, does Caroline do that for 10 years? Like that's what happens. You guys get this? This is where like you have to really be honest with yourself on where you're at in your process. If you're early on in this, I know I would be. I'm much more likely to jump in there. I'd take them to a meeting every day of the week or whatever. I probably would even have more trouble saying you can't stay at the house. But as it goes on, here's the other thing. As it goes on, it gets harder and harder to get the person to change. Would you agree with that? So when you have like a 40-year-old who's been doing this for that long, you're not, the only advice would be to set hard boundaries, get them out and detach. Because literally you're not gonna flip that script because the script has been going on so long. That's where you hear some of the stuff around. Now, you have to go through your individual situation and say, where do I have leverage in this relationship? Do I have financial leverage? Am I paying for something? Do I have emotional leverage because I am, okaying their behavior? Do you guys get that? It's going to be very different for different people on what you can do. But the longer it's been going on, the more likely you have to kind of set really, really clear boundaries. And that's just logical stuff, right? It's because the longer we do anything, the harder it is for us to change it as human beings. And if I've been in a cycle with my mom for the last 30 years, if I'd have stayed in that cycle with my mom that I've described to you guys, when I would run to her house, my wife would kick me out and I would run to my mom's house and she would like make me dinner and I would hang out with her all weekend and I would invite my friends over and we'd go skiing and we'd do cocaine and drink all weekend. You see how that wasn't going to work? That was not necessarily a consequence. If my mom would have kept doing that for 20 years, I'd be in her basement right now, guys. I'd be in her basement right now. So she met me on the deck one day and said, I'm done. She said, I did my time. And I remember thinking, like, being with me is like being in jail. She did her time.
Hard time.
Yeah. So, do you guys get that? Run it through your own situation and don't do anything radical. This doesn't mean that you go home tonight and you flip the kitchen table over. You're out. I'm not saying that, but you gotta get a perspective on this. Yes.
At first, when it's really hard to not stay awake all night worrying about somebody, when you're just starting to think maybe you can do something differently, it's really great to have somebody you can call in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Favor's great about that.
Yeah.
Call anytime and say, I really can't go get him, I really can't. And
Yeah.
nobody says no, absolutely not. They just talk you through, and that
Yeah.
is very helpful.
I think that is a good point. Her comment was, if you're struggling with something and you're having trouble kind of following through on it, we have an actual 24-hour call line that we encourage people to call and say, now that call line is for everyone. It's not just for family members. So the analogy would be if I was struggling with drinking, I would call that call line and say, I want to drink, and they would say, don't drink. Okay? If a family member was saying, I'm going over there, I'm bailing them out, they would say, what? Don't do that, let's think this through. And that's what you would use that for. That can definitely help. What about so there's this part of us as human beings, it's just really, really hard to worry about someone we love. It's very difficult to sit in that feeling. It's one of the most uncomfortable feelings ever invented. Whoever invented it. It's probably worse than like physical pain to a lot of people. It is incredibly difficult for a mom. It's very difficult for a mom. It literally, the reason that the species exists, the reason why human beings are still on the planet. Oh, the cards. Look, Dory's like a game show host. Thank you, Dory. So, the reason that the species exists is because moms were overprotective and they were all codependent enablers, right? That's how you're hardwired. So when you're laying there in bed, you're not going to be okay with it. You're going to be like freaking out, man. But I'm going to tell you what will happen is, as you do it longer, you will get more and more comfortable with it, and it'll be okay. It'll be okay. And here's what you're also going to find out that's interesting. I've been saying this more and more, and people kind of like look at me like I'm strange, but I really do believe this. In most cases, the person's actually even going to be okay. Mary Kay?
In a lot of cases, they're not as bad off as you think they are.
It's not quite what you think. It's very natural for us to do what? Go to worst case scenario type thinking. And I am in no means minimizing the fact that horrible stuff can happen. Absolutely. But you will go to that automatically almost every single time. He stormed out the house, or I haven't heard from him for 4 days, or whatever. And it's tough, but it doesn't automatically mean that it's the worst thing ever.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I am not this child's mother. I'm on the periphery, and I feel like I'm at the point where it's him or us.
Yeah.
And if we make the hard decision to say we're not doing this anymore, like for real, I feel like that's saying that I want him to die, which is not true.
No, it's not. It's not true, and it's not even likely. Now, the reason why it's so hard to keep that in mind is because right now it's more dangerous than it's ever been before. But it's still, like, statistically speaking, not likely to be the outcome. It just isn't, guys. And now, why do we go to worst case scenario thinking? That's how we're wired. That's how people are wired. That's how human beings are wired. That's what you're conditioned to do. You're conditioned literally to think like, hey, what's the worst thing that can happen here? Not to be chilled out. I mean, think about it from an evolutionary psychology point of view. The people who were chilled out were getting eaten. There was no such thing as an anxiety disorder back then, right? The people with anxiety disorders, they were passing their genes on. It was good stuff. You wanted to be like nervous. But now you're physically safe, so you will find psychological threats. Do you guys understand that? Your brain will be looking for psychological threats. And if it isn't your son, then it's your job, or it's your daughter, or it's yourself, or it's your car is going to break down, or whatever it is. It's just so difficult to stay reasonable in these situations.
I also had to go to that worst case scenario and sit one night and cry all night and think, okay, what if that happens?
Yeah.
Then what? Can I live with myself? And then you go back to the 3 C's.
Yeah.
And you gotta.
I didn't cause it. I can't cure it. I didn't cause it. You can't cure it.
And I
You
have to
control
read
it.
that at the cross. I mean, that's
Yeah.
my religious belief.
Yeah.
You know, God, take this guilt.
Yeah.
I can't handle it.
If you have some type of way that you can reconcile like that, that's always, I won't say it's the best way to go, but it's the most obvious way to go. If you could turn that over. Yes, ma'am.
That is my question, is how do you flip off that mom switch? And
So-
how, this is the first, we've been dealing with this for a long time, but, you know, this is the first time I've actually accepted it, because I think my denial was worse than his.
Yeah.
So I finally found my footing, and I got strong, but at the same time, you know, everybody sees him as this 25-year-old man, and he's my baby.
Right.
That's what I see, I see
Yeah.
my baby, and I can't.
No, I think it's a great question. So the first thing is say, no one should tell you to flip it off. I would never tell you that. So I don't think any of us can sit in judgment of anyone else who hasn't flipped the switch off. And what I can also tell you is you won't flip the switch off. You will be miserable with it for a period of time. What might start to happen is that you would get better at it, or you would get used to it a little bit. You would just, it wouldn't be okay, but it just wouldn't be quite as bad. And then the idea would be you would eventually get to a point where you would be able to do your life, and you would be able on most days to be okay while he was doing his life. And you would be like, he's an adult, and he's 25, and he's going to do his life. And you'd have to constantly be telling yourself that. You'd have to constantly be praying. You'd have to constantly be redirecting yourself all day, every day. Nighttime will be the worst. Nighttime tends to be the worst. Before you go to bed, as you're getting ready to lay down, that kind of stuff, your brain will start kicking in at that point in time. You'd have to start to develop tricks of the trade to deal with that. But don't be thinking that all of a sudden you're supposed to be okay with it, because you never will be. And that just wouldn't even be right. You wouldn't even be, I mean, if somebody came in and said, like, this is what's going down with my 25-year-old son, but I'm okay with it, I'd be like, huh? Can you wait here a minute while I call an ambulance? You know, and so, because there's this thing called affect appropriate to situation. What that means is that your emotional response is appropriate to what's going on. I'm anxious because I should be anxious. I'm angry because I should be angry. I'm sad because I should be sad. And that's absolutely the case. Yes, sir.
What do you think about using like applications like Calm or some sort of meditation app just to kind of help bring you back to yourself? Because frankly, our minds will run wild.
I think anything you can do to meditate, pray, slow yourself down, breathe, take a moment to not try to just let it go. I mean, if you know what worry's like, and if you think about worry, and you just sort of visualize it and conceptualize it a little bit, it's kind of like literally running down a bunch of different rabbit trails, right? This could happen, that could happen, this could happen, that could happen, this could happen, and if that happens, then this is going to happen. If this happens, that's going to happen. If this, and you can just, it'll just go, man, like boom. And the idea would be like to bring your back into the moment, ground yourself, and say, okay, this is okay, this is okay. Talk to yourself, literally talk yourself through it. Music can help. Carol?
Back to what she was saying about, she's afraid that if you choose not the son, but your husband, your relationship, that he may use and die. Well, I used to think crazy thoughts like that, and someone told me, and I'm sure it's maybe an Al-Anon saying, but nothing we do can make them use or not use. It's their choice. Nothing we can do to make them use or not use, and that helps me. Because my daughter had 2 overdoses, you know, and I thought,
Well, one of the things about detachment that is helpful is for the family, it's a way of trying to put closure to an otherwise open-ended situation that will never go away. One of the problems with addiction, you know, you hear people talk about addiction as a disease, right? We hear that all over the place, but it's different than other diseases. So if you have cancer, you're in a bed and you're getting treatment, and even if it's a worst case scenario, the family feels like they've done everything, and here it is, and even if this is going to end bad, we're here and we're under this situation, and it sucks, but we can kind of like see this through. Addiction is not like that. It's this never-ending process of crisis to issue, and it went good for 2 months. Let's get them back in, or it went good for 2. You follow me? And so the deal with detachment is it's actually a way of putting closure to that and saying whatever happens, happens. And then maybe you're able to move on through it. So, because here's the thing, and when I say this, in no way am I minimizing anybody's experience in this room, or my mom's experience, or my wife's experience with my addiction. But there is nothing on the planet worse than what I went through with my son this summer. And it had nothing to do with addiction. He was 6 years old, and he had respiratory failure, and I thought he was going to die. He was like in a drug-induced coma for like 4 days. And now, for the rest of my life, every time he coughs, I'm going to freak out. You know, I'm literally going to get like super anxious and sit up and like watch him. I'm gonna like, he's going to be like 40 years old, and I'm going to be staring at him with like an EpiPen. Now, the reason why I say that is that none of us, no family on this planet escapes without some type of tragedy and pain. That's not what the Hallmark movies tell us. And that's not what the commercials tell us. And that's not what the world, that's not the message that you're taught. You're taught that if you do certain things and you do it the right way, well, my goodness, you'll have this perfect white picket fence family, and everything will work out. You know? None of that's true, guys. Sometimes you can see it. Sometimes you can see the pain. Sometimes you can witness it. Sometimes you can see it through these kind of situations that we're all dealing with. Sometimes you can't. You know, I always say one of the advantages of being a therapist is you get to really see like exactly what's going on out there. Everybody's literally dragging something. This is really hard because it's continuous. You probably feel like there's no finish line. And you don't want to feel like there's a finish line, because sometimes the finish line can be the worst case scenario. But what I'm telling you is if you find a way to deal with this, if you start today and you find a way to deal with it, You'll get better at it, and it will not eat you up the way it's eating you up right now. And that's actually what you want, if you think about it. That's what you're looking for. Mary Kay?
For me, I know that I had to find a way to detach but still be a mother.
Yes.
And I had to be able to say to my son, I can't help you with this addiction anymore, but I can help you with any kind of help that you want to get for yourself. I can make the phone calls, I can do this, I can't pay your rent, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
But I can do that for you. If you want it, you have to tell me.
Yeah.
Or I had to do, like, I'll take you out to lunch. I'll buy you groceries. I won't give you money anymore. I won't do this anymore. But I could not 110% detach.
So the thing about that is that some people detach altogether. The reason they detach altogether is it's kind of like the idea of total abstinence. You know, it's like I can't drink a little. So if I go out and have a couple beers, I'm going to go ahead and have too much. It'd be like some people literally can't have any contact because they go back into that mode.
Right.
You found out you were able to pull it off.
Well, not only was I able to do it, but, you know, he didn't necessarily like what I had to offer.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like what Mac was talking about. Like, it's like
Yeah,
he made the decision.
They made it easy for me.
You will find that, especially with younger people. Like, as you start to say, like, hey, you know, we're not going to, you know, foot the bill here anymore, and we're not, but we'll have lunch and stuff. Be kind of like, nah, I'm good.
Because I figured if he was starving, he would take me up on
Yeah,
it.
yeah. You got to remember the other thing, and also when you put drugs into the process and you put addiction into the process, people's emotional growth kind of becomes stunted. And so, like a 28-year-old can actually be like a 21-year-old. And I don't know how many people here have known your average 21-year-old. They're pretty selfish. You know, you kind of like there's something that happens like when it's like 16. There's like, where did my kid go? Like, what is that? Where did that animal come from? And it's like, and when do they come back? Maybe like 26, 27, 28 under good conditions, right? But if you mix drugs with it, maybe what happens is that all gets depressed and slowed down. And so you're dealing with people who are going to be like, okay, fine, whatever. You don't have anything for me. I don't want to see you. Now, they're going to wake up one day. They're going to wake up one day. They will. They will all wake up one day because I woke up one day. And I'm telling you, like, you'll have to figure out as a person at that point in time how you want to handle it. The programs, some of the 12-step programs have a built-in process for that. It's called amends. But I also know that you'll hear parents and family members talk and say, he never made amends, she never made an amends, she's in recovery, but he's never made an amends, she's never made an amends. You have to figure out how you want to handle that as a family member if your loved one's in that stage. You know, whether you want to say, like, let bygones be bygones and I'm going to redo this relationship, or how do you ever trust again? You'll hear people talk about that. There is this idea of what if the person starts to do what they need to do? How do I handle that? Where do I go with it? And so you can start to think that through too. You guys see what I'm talking about there? So classic stuff. I'm done. I quit. I'm never doing this again. I shouldn't have done it, Mom. I shouldn't have done it, Dad. I shouldn't have done it, Melissa. Do you guys get that? I shouldn't have done this anymore. I'm done. Okay, fine, you're done, but I'm not. You're not going to fool me again. You're not moving back in the house. I'm not giving you my heart. I'm not coming by every day. And then what do you do from there? Because you want the person to be okay, and if they're going to be okay, you want to have a relationship with them, right? So what do? How do you handle that? You guys get the question? Anybody have any thoughts on that scenario?
That's a tough one. Really hard.
That is a tough one.
I said call Hubert.
Call Hubert. Call Hubert. Hubert's the guy that works for us. Okay, so here's what I would tell you about this, because, and this is what I would say. I would say, like, the burden of proof is on the person. Okay, so you don't owe anything, and you probably want to be smart about it. And what you want to do is you want to be like, I'm not going to investigate this, but if you're doing the right thing, I will notice. I will be able to tell if you're doing the right thing. And here's some ways that you'll be able to tell. You won't have to fight with them about going and doing programming. They'll go to their therapist. They'll go to their meetings. They will go do what they need to do because what? They're doing the right thing. You will also see, and if anybody in here has a loved one in recovery, you can speak to this, you will see a change in attitude. You will see a change in attitude to the world. Not even based on your questions. You want to know why? Because we just start to feel better. We just start to look at the world different. You know, when you've been getting high and getting drunk all the time and all of a sudden you don't have hangovers, you're feeling a little bit better. You know, when you're not trying to find ways to get a hold of pills, life is a little easier. When you have money to pay the bills, you're a little bit less stressed out. You'll notice literally from their behavior on how things are going. Here's another one. If a person is actually clean and not using drugs, they will always, always pee in a cup. There has never been a person on the face of the earth that was actually like clean and refused to take a drug test. Okay? If they say that they won't take a drug test, it's because they've been using. Period. So you'll see like all this other stuff start to go on, but you have to say to yourself, how long does this need to go on before I feel comfortable about this? And what do you think goes into that part of the decision? Anybody have any thoughts on what would go into that part of the decision?
I think that's really individual.
It's very individual based on things like how many times have you had that happen? How many times have you been around that merry-go-round?
How big have the lies been that they've told you?
And how much drama has there been around it? Like how serious was it, the last time it went down? Length of time, depends a lot on the individual person. Yes?
But at the same time, I've known a lot of people that when their loved ones started to make changes, they didn't really appreciate the very small changes that they were able to make and let them make those small ones over and over and over and over until it multiplied into bigger ones. Does that make sense? Because for me, any little tiny thing that showed me that he was changing, I just latched onto it. I didn't say anything, I didn't get overly excited, but in my mind I was just like almost chopping them up, adding them up. It's like,
Well, I think that...
that he loved me, and that he called, that he did this, that he did that, just...
No, I think that there's also, like, you're going to have your internal experience of anything and how you're feeling about it, and then the opposite of what you're doing externally. So it's one thing to be like, Rich is doing the right thing. It's another thing to say, like, here's the keys to the apartment. You get that? And so you can, the first one you can kind of go with, but can you discipline yourself around some of the other stuff on the back end? And then also, like, what do you support the person in versus what do you not support the person in? You'll hear people say all the time, like, a basic guideline is I will support you in your recovery. I won't support you when you're in active addiction. And so what that means is that I will give you a ride to a meeting. Or if maybe I will talk about getting you back in a recovery house. But whatever that may be also depends on the number of times and how many times you've gone through that with the person, how many times they've deceived you or not deceived you. You get that part too? And again, I think that the factors are what? Let's just go through them. Age has a lot to do with it. How many previous efforts at this recovery process? How deep and kind of like diabolical were the lies and was the behavior? How bad did it get? Were you in any way threatened? Were you in any way in danger? Were you in any way, was your property stolen? Like, you can get to a point where you say, like, I don't really care what you're doing. I got your back and I'm praying for you, but you're not coming in my house. Because that's just what? Sensible. Questions about that, guys? Questions or comments? I feel like I'm giving you options, but I can't tell you how to do it because you have to think through your own.
Lies get so professional, though, that they believe themselves. Our son doesn't, he thinks he's fine. I've got it. You're not going to tell me anything that I don't already know. We just can't get him to make the step to recognize.
Yeah, and my PowerPoint's not working, but that's all about the brain. That's the brain change that occurs whenever you go to that irrational place. When a person's actively using the part of their brain that's like the thinking part actually gets shut down and you're going on instincts at that point. And so the lies are really just a way, it's almost like a survival mechanism that people will resort to. And when you say people believe them, I firmly do believe that. I mean, one of the most interesting things that I had in my own personal experience around this pain pill addiction was I was absolutely convinced that my neck, I was in excruciating pain. I got clean and I haven't had any issues with my neck, you know? And then you look at statistics that 80% of people that are on long-term workers' comp claims are addicted to opioids. So what's going on there is that they've convinced themselves that they're in pain. So it literally is like a psychological shift, and you can make an argument that they could pass a lie detector test. You know? You have to know that as you're going through that with the person, and you have to temper that when you're talking to them.
You know what, Rich? I'm just wondering if their brain is telling them that they do.
Yeah, it is. It is. It literally is, because the goal is I got to get a hold of these things, or I got to get a hold of these things. Or even if you're not using initially, early on, it's kind of like, I don't really want anyone knowing. We call it protect your addiction. You don't want to come up for everything. You don't want to tell the truth, because what? If I tell the whole truth, then maybe I can't go do this again. So I'll tell these lies, and I'll put these shields up, and I'll kind of like, I'll keep myself between you and the drug by telling you these lies, because we call it a reservation. I have a reservation where I might go back to that. And it's really like a very bizarre kind of neurobiological process. It really is. And I know I did that. I mean, my goodness. I was just... And then what happens is when you run out of creative lies, what you resort to, I'll just give you a heads up, you just resort to straight up, it didn't happen. You didn't see what you just saw. And the strategy is just say the same thing over and over and over and over and over, and just say, okay, that's not what happened. I don't know what you're talking about. That's not what was going on. Yeah, I saw you were using cocaine back in the back. No, that wasn't what was going on. What are you doing in the men's bathroom anyway? I've told you all that story, haven't I? You know, and so over and over and over and over and over, and all that is that's literally like panic almost. It's like the person who's telling the lie at that point is almost nearly in a panic because they don't want to give up the addiction. And they know that if the truth comes out at that point, then they might have to give up the addiction. We joke about this a lot in recovery, and I know I had this incident happen like 2 or 3 times. And I don't really know what happens when this goes down. And I don't know if it happens to everyone, but man, you'll have like this stuff go down, and you're using and you're doing all this stuff, and really no one knows. And I'll go down. I remember going down to the basement. My wife's down there, and I come downstairs, and I just sit down, and I just basically spill my guts and tell her everything that I was up to. And then the next morning, I'm like, what the hell was that? Like, what were you thinking, dude? You know, and so what was that just happened? Like a moment of clarity. A moment of like, but it goes away very quickly, guys. It goes away very quickly. You're like, drat, why did I do that?
What triggers a moment of clarity?
You know, I think what happens is even, it's misery, you know, internal misery a lot. Like maybe things aren't happening externally, but for me what it was is that I was never sleeping, man. I mean, I'm talking like just lay there all night and start to go through withdrawal. And then I remember, like, I literally remember being like, there aren't enough of these pills. And I got to tell you, like, not knowing anything about what pain pills were, and I wasn't a therapist then, understand, I never went to a recovery group. It's a very panicky kind of feeling to realize that, like, literally, I remember, like, being like, there aren't enough of these on the planet. Because I'm going to have to do this for the rest of my life. Do you guys follow that? Like, I started to realize exactly how diabolical this was. And then when you get them, so what happens is that you go through this process, and you run out early all the time, and you're sick all the time, and you're scrambling, and you're trying to find these things. And then you go, and you finally get them. And you have this moment of relief. I'm talking, but it only lasts like 5 seconds, because then you take the first 4 or 6 or whatever, and you're immediately what? I'm going to run out on such and such a date, and how am I going to do that? And you start to get to this really, really dark place. So you find
Is it that way with other drugs as well?
It's that way with all drugs. It's that way with alcohol, for that matter. You know, it might be a little bit easier to manage with alcohol because, you know, you can run down to the store and buy it. But absolutely with other drugs. Think about that. You got to find like a dealer to get it and all that kind of stuff. You don't know where you literally have no relief. When you look at the criteria, and one of the criteria for addiction is that it takes up a great deal of time. It's a full-time job. And so what happens is you're just like, then you go to your loved one in that moment, right? Because you're just so desperate. Not everybody, but this is what my experience was. You're just so desperate, you don't know who else to go to. Remember, this is 1999. Nobody's talking about this issue. You know what I mean? There's no one, you don't even know where to go to talk to somebody about it. And then by the next morning, though, you're like, oh, woo, can we talk about what I said last night? I really don't even know what happened there, man. It must have been something in the food or something like that. And you try to like retreat. It all adds up to the eventual change, though. This is interesting. Like what happens is if you were to look at that, all those experiences start to add up over time. And that's why people will eventually get this if they keep trying. Yes?
I'm gonna tell on you. I think it was like my third or fourth support night, and I came up to you and I said, she said she'll come to a meeting tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you looked at me and you said, hang on to that feeling.
Yes.
Because if nothing else, there was a seed, and she said, I'll go to a meeting.
Yeah.
She might not come, but at least you've got that.
No, and I think what happens is for a person to say that means that something's rattling around up there.
That was huge.
That's why one of the things that favor Greenville, like we've been totally misunderstood and totally mischaracterized, where people will be like, well, it's okay for people to come to favor Greenville and still smoke weed, like as if we're passing a bong at all recovery. Because people are idiots that say that type of stuff. No, what we say is that we want you to come here whether you're using or not. We would prefer you not to be high the day you were here, because that's hard to manage, right? But like, we want to get around you so that we can put stuff in your head, and because we know you're not going to figure this out on your own. But a person has to be completely abstinent to be in our program, or you go to we're going to kick them out if they use. You'll hear some therapy programs that do that. So we're going to kick them out because they displayed a symptom of the disease that you're supposed to be treating them for. So for us, we're like, no, keep coming back no matter where you are in this process, because maybe then you can start to have some of these experiences.
Is it fair to say once somebody actually concedes and starts down a road to recovery, that it's likely they'll stumble at least once or twice?
It's very likely. It's almost, I mean, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I haven't met the person who just got it off the jump. The question was, do people stumble and fall? The problem in today's world is that there's some substances up there that don't give you a chance to stumble and fall. But the most common experience is about 6 to 8 times making an effort.
Gotcha.
That doesn't mean 6 to 8 trips to rehab, guys. That means 6 to 8 concerted efforts. Yes?
Are we gonna sign the sign-in sheet today?
We were going to sign a sign-in sheet here. I don't have a pen. Hey, can you help brother out there, Carol? Pass that back to Carol. She gets it.
Because we have some new people, they might want posters.
So, are you a school teacher or something that you noticed that? Are you really? Okay, all right. All right. So all this, in terms of what the family needs to do and how you want to think about this, all of this comes down to boundaries and setting boundaries and starting to say, how do I want to be treated, and how do I want my life to be despite what my loved one's doing? Do you get that? So how do I want to talk to my loved one? How often do I want to interact? Where are they going to live? All that kind of stuff comes in under boundaries, right? And boundaries, really interestingly, aren't about you controlling the other person. Because a lot of people get boundaries confused with rules. Rules are Rich is allowed to do this, Rich is allowed to do that, Rich is not allowed to do this, he's not allowed to do that. You don't want to do that. You're setting yourself up for failure, and nobody wants to be treated that way. Boundaries are how you want to be treated. So the deal is, you can't live in my house, not because I'm trying to control you, but I can't watch you self-destruct. I'm not going to pay for you to continue to go to college, not because I'm trying to control your behavior and get you not to drink and get you not to use drugs, but I can't be part of your self-destruction. Do you see that? So it's not about the other person, it's about you and how you want to be treated. Mary Kay?
When you told that story long ago about sleeping, about whether or not your loved one would stay out all night, that you turned it and flipped it and said,
So it's a super simple thing, but and people say, well, that's just words, but it's important, because what you're trying to do is if you try to control the other person, you could really say this goes beyond addiction. Like, controlling another person isn't the easiest thing to do, especially if you're both adults. So the scenario that Mary Kay's talking about had to do with, let's just say it was a younger person, somebody in their mid-20s or whatever, and maybe they had completed rehab and they're coming back and they're living at your house. And you're kind of talking about curfew. What time do you need to come in? And there's this argument going on around, you're going to come in at 1 or you're going to come in at 12:30 or whatever, and you're just trying to put a rule on them. You got to be in at 12:30. All right? Now the kid goes out and he comes in at 12:45 because something happened. Comes in at 12:45. Now you have to what? You have to issue consequences because he broke the rule. What we suggest you do is you say things like, I can't sleep until you get in the house. I get it. You know, you're 25 and your night just starts at like 1 o'clock in the morning. I get it. I remember that. But I can't sleep until you come in. And so we got to figure out, you got to be in around 12:30. You got to be in around 12:30. So now the kid comes in at 12:45. You don't have to say anything. You don't pick a fight. You just get him the next morning and you remind him, say, dude, that's not how we're going to do this, right? You follow where I'm coming from? You're not hammering it like that. You're not creating a contract or anything like that because you're just going to butt heads, man. You're just setting it up for these battles around these incidents. And be like, you know, you're going to go to a meeting every single day. Now, I don't know if you want to go down that road. Here's the deal. If you live in our house, I know how this recovery thing works. If you're going to be here, you got to be doing something related to your recovery. What's your plan? And what I want you to do is sign a release of information so I can check in. Seriously, like that's the type of stuff. When my daughter went through what she went through this summer, we had to go and do. I knew we were going and we were going to do a contract, okay? And when I walked in, I said, under no conditions am I kicking my daughter out. So I don't even want to talk about that. I said, Elizabeth, there is nothing you can do that'll make me say you have to leave. Because I knew that about myself. Do you guys follow that? I knew that if I said anything other than that, it would just be BS. And I'm not saying that was the right or wrong thing to do. It was just, let's just get that straight out, right out there. But if you can focus on yourself rather than the other person, it'll feel different to the other person. It'll feel like you're not kind of like coming down on them and trying to control them. You know the natural human tendency whenever someone tries to control us is to do what? The opposite. Literally, push back. To push back and explain to you why it won't work and how that's not going to happen. And then, you know, so the kid's home from rehab one day, and the therapist at rehab got you up there and said, look, you got it. You are in charge. You have got, this kid has got to be in meetings, and he's got to be in at 10:30 every night. You know, and then that very night, he's like, I'm going out. And you're like, well, it's 10:05. Well, I'm going out. And you're immediately in a fight. You know what I mean? And so how do you negotiate that? And how do you work through that? Look, man, I think it's very interesting how the world works. Like, we get into these situations where we kind of like, we'll do prevention, right? And we'll tell kids not to use drugs. Oh, that's genius. Don't use drugs. They're bad for you, and we'll show pictures of them and stuff. And you know what? If that works, we're good to go, right? And then if our kid does the wrong thing, and stays out too late, or maybe gets a DUI, or does some underage drinking, or God forbid something worse than that, then people say, punish him, take away the car keys, take away the car, don't let him do it ever again, he'll never do it. Great, if that works. Are you following me? The problem is nobody has an answer for the kids who reject that. And there are kids who will not follow directions, not because you're a bad parent, not because you did anything wrong, because that's just how they're wired. And I know my son Aiden's one of them. Yeah, it's scary as hell. Like that kid will not. I can get everyone else to do it, but there's like this, you know how it rained for like 183 days in a row in South Carolina? And in my yard, there's this big, gigantic like mud hole, all right? And it doesn't matter what I do, I cannot keep him out of that mud hole, all right? So what is that? What is going on with him? Was he parented wrong? No. He's literally wired different than his brother. Do you guys get that? Like, he's literally wired different. How is he wired different? He's more impulsive. He's more of a risk taker. Also, there are other kids who are wired different in a different way. What about kids that might be, or kids or husbands, wives, whatever, that might be a little bit more depressed? Are they more likely to blow off the expectations and look for some payoff? The idea that it's that simple as saying don't do it, my goodness, I wish it was like that. I really, truly was, dude. And people used to say, like, did you tell them not to use drugs? No, I never thought of that. Never thought that might be like the way to go, yes.
Was your daughter different because like our daughter was different when she was little. I mean, I always knew that this was, you know, the one that Dr. Dobson talked about, strong-willed style.
No, I think it's very different for different people. And if you talk it through, what you do find is when you look back, you can pick out characteristics that seem to make people